Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Curious Neuron family meeting. My name is Cindy, and I'm the founder of Curious Neuron. And tonight we have a special guest. We have Laura, who is joining us tonight. She is an occupational therapist and a pediatric occupational therapist, and we're talking about sensory sensitivities. Laura, can you hear me? Oh, Laura, can you hear me? No. Let me see. Hold on. And if, just for those of you, let me know if you could hear me. Laura, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Hi. Yes. So I don't think you heard me before, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't.
Yeah?
I hear you now, though. There you
Okay,
go.
perfect. Yeah. So like I said, this is Laura. She's an occupational therapist, and she is also the head of the OT Butterfly. Is it the OT Butterfly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
It.
I want to make sure I don't invert them. And yeah, we're talking about sensory sensitivities. It's a topic that I covered. I think a couple months ago, and we got lots of questions around that. And I think it's something that we sort of know about, but we aren't speaking about it enough. And I think it's important that we do talk about it tonight. So please ask Laura your questions. Any question that you have the question box on the right. So you just have to type in. I will put it under chat mode for now while we chat a little bit. Come say hi, let us know where you're from, and then I'll put it into question mode, and then you can type in your questions so that everybody could see them. If you are joining us for the first time tonight, this is what we call Curious Neuron family meetings. Every Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, I meet with you guys so that we can chat about parenting. I give you my troubles, my successes, and my challenges as well, and give you the chance to ask questions. So yeah, and I like to start with little stories. I was just telling Laura about my story for tonight. In the chat box, let me know if it's ever happened to you where you have been injured unintentionally by your child. So a couple nights ago, I fell asleep in my kid's bed. So my 3 and 5-year-olds sleep in the same bed, and I never, ever fall asleep in their bed. And for the first time ever, and by the way, also as a side note, my husband always falls asleep in their bed. So I finally fell asleep in their bed. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by a headbutt, but not just a little headbutt, like a really strong one. And my husband heard crying, and he ran into my baby's room thinking that my baby was awake. But it was me. I was the one crying like a baby because it hurt so much. And my 3-year-old woke up because of my crying. And I also forgot to tell you, Laura, but I also woke up my baby. So then my husband had to run into the baby's room.
It was a big family affair.
So we were all awake. And then I went into my bed because I didn't want to sleep there anymore. But basically, not only did I get headbutted, but I don't know if some of you went onto Instagram before, and I don't know if you could see it very well, but I got a beautiful black eye.
I was going to mention, Cindy, your video is not on, so I wasn't sure if you meant for it to be on, because I don't see it. There you are.
Oh my goodness. It hasn't been on since before?
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Oh,
no. Maybe she's just highlighting me for tonight.
No.
I wasn't sure. And then you started talking about it. Okay.
All right. Yep, okay, well, at least you could hear me. But here is my beautiful black eye that I got from my son. So that felt great. Have you ever been hurt, Laura? Unintentionally, obviously, but...
I have had some pretty bad headbutts on accident with big movements, but nothing with a black eye or leaving a mark. Not yet.
Yeah, we never know, right? They always surprise you. Okay, I'm glad you guys were able to see me since before. At least I was.
Oh,
that's good.
So weird.
That's weird. I don't know.
But now I see you.
All right. So now we spent a few minutes, waited for everybody to trickle in. Well, I'm sure more will pop in and pop out. That's part of parenting and parenthood.
Yeah. Totally get it.
Yeah. Let's start off our topic, I guess. What are sensory sensitivities?
Yes. So sensory sensitivity is really considering a child who has kind of a low threshold for sensory input. So when you're thinking of thresholds, remember, first of all, we all have sensory preferences. We all take in sensory information from the environment and process it. Some of us like more of a certain kind of sensory input. Some of us like less of it. Some of us can't tolerate a certain kind. I specifically can't stand a lot of competing sounds. I don't like loopy rides. I love hearing other parents' sensory quirks. So if anyone wants to type in the chat box
I love that.
what their sensory quirks are, please share, because we all have them.
Yeah.
But So speaking specifically of a child with sensory sensitivities, they have what we call a low threshold. So if you're thinking of a threshold, think of like of cups. So a child with a low sensory threshold who is sensory sensitive has a really small sensory cup. That means it gets overflowed easily. So they're dysregulated easily. They can't tolerate a lot of input. And so let's take sound, for example. Maybe the sound of a sneeze to you or I, we would register it. Maybe that would be one drop in our sensory cup. But to a sensory sensitive child who is sensitive to auditory or sound input, a sneeze might be 5 drops in their cup versus one. So they are perceiving it much more intense than what it is. And I like to really stress the word perceive because it is that perception of it. And so a lot of parents will, or, you know, any caregiver, someone who doesn't have sensory sensitivities might think, it's not that loud. Why are you having such a big reaction? That was nothing, or I didn't even hear that. But these children who have sensory sensitivities really experience the world in more of a heightened, in a heightened state. So they everything is too, or not everything, but they might describe it as too loud, too bright, too sticky, too stinky. They might notice a lot of different things. And just some other words for parents who are here. You might also see it online as, so you might see low threshold, you might see sensory sensitivity, sensory defensiveness is also a way to describe it, and sensory over responsivity. So they over respond to input.
Interesting. And it's, I really like the fact that you started off with us as parents, because I do get that too. For me, like that competing sound for me as well, having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. Sometimes the 3-year-old was having, you know, a meltdown and screaming, and then the 1-year-old happens to cry just for no reason. And those sounds they're overwhelming. Or even touch. By the end of the day, I have 3 kids at home, and there's always somebody in your arms, a baby, or you're jumping around and whatever it is. And then at the end of the day, you notice you're kind of like, okay, just, I need space.
Exactly.
Just,
but that's the difference, right? We can say, I need space versus a little one who doesn't quite have the language, who doesn't quite understand why they feel that way, might push or scream or have that meltdown because they need space, but they didn't know that that's what they needed. That's really that gap between, that gap that we need to bridge to get them to self-regulation, because they can't regulate if they're not aware of what their needs are, and they can't communicate what they need. So that's something that's really important. And then the other thing that you mentioned was at the end of the day, right? It's an accumulation of it. So that's why a lot of the kids have a really hard time after school. If your kids are back in school right now, the school and the classroom is such a multi-sensory experience that throughout the day, they are just being bombarded, sound, sight, smells. And then by the time they get home, their cup is already full, and one little thing in there will overflow it. And so I also see that too towards the end of the week, an accumulation of the Monday through Thursday. So like Thursday afternoon and Fridays were really hard days for me at the clinic, because some of those kids were very dysregulated, and rightfully so, because there's a lot going on.
So when we talk about sensory sensitivity, is it just, like you said, same thing that we have, or is it also something that is diagnosed?
Yeah, so sensory sensitivity is really a subtype of a subtype in sensory processing disorder. So without getting too technical, sensory processing disorder is kind of this big umbrella, and then there's something called sensory modulation disorder, and then there's sensory-based motor disorders, and that's a whole other type. So within sensory modulation disorder, this is how your body responds. So there's the over responders, which are the sensory sensitive kids. There's the seekers, who are the kids who cannot get enough of certain type of input. And then there's the under responders who don't quite register a lot of things, and they might miss a lot of things. These are the kids who don't really hear their name being called, or they might not notice when there's food on their face. They're just kind of like oblivious to some kind of the input. So it's a subtype, but in terms of it being diagnosed, that's something that we are still in the field really, really fighting for. There is research to back up sensory processing disorder, but it's not included in the diagnostic manual yet on its own. It's considered a symptom or part of autism, ADHD, anxiety, and I believe OCD as well. But as a standalone disorder, it's not quite recognized yet in the medical world. Although if you ask any OT and me as a parent of a child with sensory sensitivities, I 100% see it as a standalone thing, meaning I don't notice any, any other big challenges,
Yeah.
but the sensory pieces are very impacted.
So you started talking a bit about the sensory seekers and the differences. And can you maybe give us a better idea of what to look for in our child, to maybe understand if they do or they might have, signs of sensory sensitivity?
Yes. So what really differentiates a child who has a sensory processing challenge that constitutes the need for an intervention versus you or I, who we said we're sensory sensitive, right? Because we
Yeah.
all kind of have those times of day, or we
Mm-hmm.
have our sensory quirks. The difference is typically one, there's more of a consistent pattern for these kids. It's impacting them daily or weekly, but definitely more than just, when they're sick or on the holidays. You'll notice it more consistently and a pretty consistent trigger or consistent pattern. The other thing to consider is that if it's impacting them really functionally and their ability to participate. So, like we said, you or I get really overwhelmed by sounds at the end of the day, but we're able to say, "I need space." It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we can't have social engagements. We can't hang out with friends. We don't avoid parties. We don't
Mm-hmm.
avoid school stuff. But a child who has sensory sensitivities that needs intervention or extra support might be avoiding tasks that are impacting their development. So if they can't maybe participate in PE or brownies or a sport they want to because they're too sensitive to clothes, that they can't wear the uniform.
Got it.
Or I have a lot of families who end up not, like, they can't go to restaurants anymore or family parties because it's just too overwhelming. Their child has meltdowns the whole way.
Mm.
And so it really starts to impact the family dynamic. And then also the child is limited in their ability to
Mm-hmm.
participate. And the other thing I want to mention in terms of qualifying or really differentiating between a child who has just sensory preferences and a sensory challenge related to sensitivity is your child might have these sensitivities to sound or sight or touch or movement. But if they also are experiencing really big, intense meltdowns or
Mm.
challenges with sleep, or challenges with feeding, so those big kind of things that are really more of a daily impact, that really I feel like adds an extra layer and is kind of when I'm intaking clients or talking to parents, that's where I'll also ask. I'll say, are they also really having meltdowns or extremely attached to a certain caregiver? A
Mm.
lot of our sensory kids will
Oh,
really have to only be with mom or dad.
why do you know why that is? That's just interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why, but
Hmm.
I would say that piece is more anecdotal from like the
Okay.
parents that I've
Yeah.
worked with. It's typically because they find one caregiver more safe.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
It could be both mom and dad, but there's
That's
definitely a
interesting.
stronger attachment to parents and they have a harder time with dropping off at school or dropping
Mm-hmm.
off at daycare. And the other piece that's related to that is their need for routine and the structure, and they're very inflexible with change. So a lot of times this can present as OCD, and it's really
Mm.
hard to separate because my daughter, for example, anytime something in the environment is different, um, that's something that their brain has to spend extra energy
Mm.
processing, right? And saying,
Got it.
I spent so much time already processing the sounds from the TV and processing the feeling of this or that. But then now, when you change something around, my brain is having to reprocess everything. And that just makes me a little bit more anxious and
Yeah.
makes me have more of a meltdown. So that's
Mm.
why kids with sensory processing challenges really need that routine.
You're mentioning a lot of the meltdowns that come around or
Mhm.
that are part of this. So it's interesting, maybe if a parent never thought about sensory sensitivities and you are experiencing in your daily life with your child lots and lots of intense meltdowns, that perhaps writing a journal of when they're happening. I usually talk about this for tantrums, just understand the tantrum, but
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
might even link you to understanding a bit more of their sensory sensitivities, I think.
Yeah,
Mm.
yes, exactly. Kind of, and I helped a client of mine recently pinpoint what was happening with her son's meltdowns, and she could not figure it out. And I had to tell her that sometimes it's not quite it's not quite a cause and effect that's so clear to us, where it's right before something happens and they have a meltdown,
Got
which
it.
is more so related to a tantrum. It's easy
Yeah.
to tie. You wanted that cup, you didn't get the cup.
Got it. Yeah.
For meltdowns, for sensory meltdowns, like I mentioned earlier, it can be an accumulation of the
Oh,
day,
got it. So it could have happened a
or
while. Yeah.
weeks, and it could have happened a while ago. So my go-to example for this that really gives parents the light bulb is, again, going back to the school day. Imagine all of the sensory input your child has to experience throughout their day. Sounds from maybe a construction site nearby,
Mm,
maybe the lunchroom. Feeding has so many smells and sights and
mm,
sounds. A kid maybe running so fast by you, he like grazed the side of your arm. Lots of things that we're bombarded with, and that our kids are, that they're expected to hold it together at school
mm.
for
The
paying
entire
attention
day.
to the teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, holding it together. So they're walking the whole day with their sensory cup totally full. And then you get home, you give them their snack. Usually they have their milk in a blue cup, but the blue cup's dirty, so you
Ah,
give them it in the green cup.
yeah.
And then it's like, woo,
Yeah.
a big meltdown.
Yeah.
But switching out the cup, giving them what they wanted, won't fix a sensory meltdown.
Got it.
They are in fight or flight mode.
Mm.
It's really, and then there's typically like a hangover effect, like the rest of the day, like maybe for like an hour after, they're still kind of coming down from that
Wow.
heightened sensitivity. So it's really not so some of the common parenting tactics of like distraction, or
Mm.
giving them what they want, or removing the stimulus that's bothering them, won't really amend or
Mm.
fix a sensory meltdown. And it can definitely be an accumulation from the whole day or even weeks.
Yeah. Would you see
Yeah.
a difference then on weekends maybe with some of these children because they're home and things are a little quieter than in school or daycare?
Yeah, so what I found when I was talking to a lot of my clients was, after the original like shock from isolation and quarantine, when we were all
Mm.
on lockdown,
Mm.
once everyone kind of got adjusted, I was finding that a lot of my sensory sensitive clients were like, well, like so much more regulated.
Oh, yeah.
This was kind of at that beginning
Yeah.
time. And then by contrast, my families who had sensory seekers were like barely hanging on because they
Oh,
could not get like, and I was like, oh, I
yeah.
wish I could give you all of my support. And it was hard to keep them active. Even kids who
Mm.
were not seekers really were finding that they needed more movement. But as time
Then
progressed, and
routine
now
was also taken away.
the routine was off,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But now, kind of as we've gone through it, and we're still sort of in pretty strict lockdown where
Mm.
we're at, I'm finding that the kids with sensory sensitivities are coming back around with their challenges, and parents are more in tune with their needs. So parents are like,
Oh,
well, now I'm noticing this and this, and I didn't notice this before. So
interesting. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So, but definitely, I think in typical instances, downtime on the weekend definitely helps.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
good to know. And you're mentioning these two types now, but can a child have a bit of both?
Yes, it's very common for a child to have what we call mixed threshold. So,
Mm.
you can have a child be maybe sensitive to sound,
Hmm.
but really, really seek and love spinning and moving fast, and like more than
Mm.
a typical child, can't get enough of it. And also, you can be have a mixed threshold within the same sensory system. So, for example, you could have a child who is sensitive to the seams of socks, or particular fabrics of clothing, which is the touch or the tactile sense. They can
Hmm.
be sensitive to that, but they can also seek and love messy play and play with
Ah.
slime on, which is touch also. So a
Hmm.
lot of parents are like, well, why can they do this, but not that? But it's
Yeah.
definitely a common thing to have mixed thresholds.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to let the parents know that I've opened up now Q&A mode in the chat box. You can ask your question privately or to the entire, so that the entire group sees it. Ask Laura all your questions because she's here for that to help us out. So now
Mm-hmm.
we've covered a bit about what to see, and also sometimes picky eaters, right? Picky
Yeah.
eaters in the sense that there might be a texture or even a color. I think I've heard of,
Yes.
is that, yeah, that they don't
Yeah.
like, they can't. So that could fall into the sensory sensitivity as well, which is interesting
Yes.
to me. Yeah.
Picky eating is a really complex um, profile to work with from a sensory standpoint, because, as you mentioned, it is so there's all the senses are actually involved with eating, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so for parents who are here who don't know, there's actually 8 senses,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
outside. So there's 3 more outside of the typical 5, but feeding includes all of them. There is a sight, there's a smell, there's the taste, there's the hearing of the crunching, there's
Oh,
hearing
yeah.
of other people around you with
Mm.
crunching, which I know sets a
Yes.
lot of people
Yeah.
off.
It's true.
Um,
Yeah.
there's the postural component of understanding where your body is in space for when you're
Mm.
sitting, and understanding your posture and anything like that. But the other thing to consider that I try to rule out when I work with clients who have picky eaters is there's also a motor component of chewing. And sometimes an oral motor challenge of being able to chew properly and move your tongue
Mm-hmm.
properly can look like picky eating, but it's really because that child is, they can't manage certain textures in their mouth. It's too hard for them to chew. So they'll instead prefer things like oatmeal or yogurt of a certain type.
Got it.
Um, but you can definitely be sensitive to like the color of food or the shape of food.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
That's so cool.
that's why when we start working with picky eaters, the what I'm certified in is SOS training for picky eating, and they really stress the importance of introducing foods that really look the same but are
Ah.
driving variety. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to work on eating a carrot, we will introduce long stick things that are orange. So maybe a veggie straw that's orange, then a sweet potato
Oh,
fry that's
yeah.
orange and in the stick form, and then maybe a pretzel that kind of has that orange tint. So kind of visually, like as I was mentioning earlier, the more different properties you have to look at or process, the more dysregulated you can get. So you
Mm,
want to make it appeal like easy for them visually to process. It's
I
less of
love
a
that.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
There was somebody who asked to speak, Ilinka. I saw that you asked to speak, but because we're already two, we can't add another person. Because usually I can when I'm alone. But if you can type in your question either privately or for the entire group, and then Laura could answer it.
Yes.
Somebody had asked an interesting question on Instagram. They asked if it could be prevented. Any of these sensitivities could be prevented. So they had a small baby, and they were wondering if they could do something with their baby.
Right. Yeah. Well, we do know that sensory processing disorder has a biological component to it. There is a neurological basis to it. So to some extent, you can't prevent that. However,
Hmm.
you can provide your child with sensory rich experiences as they're young, um, to try to get them to be more exposed to these things. So,
Hmm.
and there's certain things that you can try to avoid, which is hard, especially in certain cultures. I know mine specifically. This was something I learned for kids to get used to messy play. Some parents are very about like wiping their mouth as soon as they like get food on their
Yes.
mouth, right? Or wiping their hands right away. Or the moms who, this is me admittedly, who didn't want to get your house dirty, so like you don't let slime, you don't let tomato.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think it starts with you as a parent starting to
Hmm.
be okay, and also stepping outside of your own sensory quirks. Like I am sometimes tactily sensitive, and I'll have to
Hmm.
kind of modulate my like facial expressions. So it's just about really being creating a safe space for your child to
Hmm.
explore and really following their lead, but try
Hmm.
to get them to explore lots of different touch, sight, smells, everything. Make it a multi-sensory experience. And the other tip I'll say is that walking or being barefoot or crawling barefoot, like in the grass and different in the carpets, different types of texture will give, especially if your child is young and still crawling, they'll get more of a full body touch input, which is different senses for them to kind of experience.
I just had a memory of my baby now, who's 15 months. But this summer we had placed him on the grass, and he would lift his whole body as much as possible, and just try to be like fingers and toes on the
Uh-huh.
grass, so that the rest of the body didn't. But
Because
then he
it's
got used to
brand
it.
new.
He's
It's
like, "What is
brand
this?"
new. Yeah. And so, well, that brings up another point is that sometimes we'll see those reactions. And it's new because it's the very first time. Sometimes they'll cry. Sometimes it's funny because they're just
Yes.
like
Yeah.
this.
I know.
But if they cry, sometimes parents will automatically think, okay, they don't like this, so I'm not going to ever put them back in the grass. Right.
Yeah.
And so avoid
Yeah.
it completely. And that's
Mm.
something you definitely don't want to do. You don't want to flood them with it and bombard them and like keep putting them in and scaring them or stressing their response.
Yeah.
But you definitely don't want, if you notice that it's something that's hard for them, I would start kind of revisiting that and slowly
Hmm.
exposing them to that so they can build kind of more of a tolerance for it.
That's a really good point. So I also think Ilinka asked her question here. So does it go away as they age? So her son is sensitive to some clothes getting just a little wet. So yeah, actually my 3-year-old does that as well too. Not sensitive with clothes, but if we, let's say we just washed our hand and we grab him
Yeah.
and it's just a little wet, he just
Oh, that's
doesn't
great.
like it at all. And also with sounds, like now, like I said, with the 1-year-old, my 3-year-old sometimes gets a bit overwhelmed because the 1-year-old cries a lot, and he's always screaming. That's his way of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something we should be doing with our kids at that point if we notice a bit of that sensitivity, or is it just going to go away with time?
Yeah, so if it's just a sensory quirk or sensory preference, it's definitely
Hmm.
kind of like what I was mentioning to so slowly like notice it, and I
Hmm.
think validate what they're seeing, kind of express it to them, even if their baby say, "Oh, that was a loud sound for you,"
Mm.
um, and just kind of acknowledging that fact, and then maybe like, okay, maybe I'm gonna start introducing more games that have that, or have more play where water play where you're having sleeves,
Oh,
and they're
got
like,
it.
"Oh my," and then you can also model how you react to it, like, oh, mommy got her sleeves wet when I was washing the dishes,
Got
I'm
it.
going to fold
Yeah.
my sleeves up. If it is a child who has more of a sensory profile, sensory processing challenge, research has showed that typically it doesn't improve without getting some kind of intervention
Hmm.
or sensory processing, sensory integration on its own, when they compared to, as opposed to a typically developing child, their senses can definitely recalibrate on their own
Hmm.
as they mature. But children who have been identified to have some sensory processing challenges don't improve on their own. So it's kind of a mix of finding an OT who can help, and then also finding ways to accommodate so that they can participate in those activities.
Hmm. So I guess
Yeah.
we're at the point now. I mean, if parents are listening and saying, okay, I have recognized some of these signs
Yeah.
in my child, what is the sort of, where's that threshold of saying maybe I should speak to my pediatrician about it, or like, where's that line, I guess, for them?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a common question I get.
Mm.
So it's definitely how impacted is your child? So
Mm.
so remember, there could be, they could be sensitive to those clothes, but as soon as you change them out of them, or as soon as you fold their sleeves up to get out of the way, even though they complain about it, they can
Mm.
just go on with their day. If
Got it.
it's saying like, now we can't go to school in the morning because they every time we change there's a new problem, or
Yeah.
now you can't go to that birthday party because there's going to be that sound, and last time we did that, and then now you're not going to be able to have these meaningful social engagements. So how much is it really impacting? What are things that you are now not able to participate in
Mm.
that's taking away from your child's quality of life, experience, and development?
Got it.
So, and then the other thing to keep in mind is, if you are seeing your child have meltdowns, which is a pretty common thing to coexist with sensory sensitivities, like you were mentioning, document it, kind of like the tantrums. But I
Mm.
would also, so I would specifically document like the frequency, how often it's happening, and how
Mm.
long they're happening,
Okay.
and the real, like, the intensity of it. So for my daughter, her pupils were dilated, she was peeing in her pants even when she was
Mm.
potty trained, but it was as soon as she had a meltdown, and that's really that involuntary sympathetic response, that fight or flight,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So it was a real thing. So I even showed videos. I had to show videos to my pediatrician to get her to kind of get on board with what I was seeing. um,
Wow.
and so, yeah, so what I'll tell parents is to definitely be prepared to advocate
Mm.
with your pediatrician, because
Mm.
I think it's pretty common for pediatricians to do the wait and see approach.
Mm.
And I think they mean
Yeah.
well in terms of trying to get us to kind of not be so paranoid about some things, especially
Hmm.
some parents, we spend so much time on the internet that I
Yeah.
feel like they have to kind of calm our nerves.
Yeah.
But really, being an OT, I've seen so many parents who come to me 3 or 4 years later after they notice something, and then it becomes more impactful and can kind of bleed into other areas of development. And
Mm.
the wait and see approach, coupled with long wait lists for evaluations and then long wait lists for treatment, can really create some like long, like, missed opportunity for
Mm.
some good intervention.
Yeah. Okay, that's good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
I see here, Ilinka also wrote, if I start singing, he gets mad at random sensitive things. So maybe that singing is part of that auditory stimulation too for a child, or because that child also was the same one with the sensitivity to clothing, with the wet
Okay.
clothes.
Sorry, I missed that first part that you were reading her question. Can you repeat that?
It's the second. I don't know if you see the questions on your screen.
Oh,
So
if I start singing,
yeah,
he gets mad at random
yeah.
sensitive things. Yeah, it could be related to auditory. Sometimes I don't know how old she
Four,
mentioned.
four.
Four.
She said at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes that auditory component can bother them. And I also would notice, Alinka, at the time of day, because if
Mm.
it's like at night when they're already overstimulated, like my daughter will love music in the morning. And then today we were listening to it. And then at one point she goes, "Can you turn off the music? It's too much." Like,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
after a while, it's kind of like hit that threshold and it's too much. So I wonder if you also notice, Alinka, at the certain times of day that it happens, and start keeping track of that. These are
Hmm.
good things to note. Like, if if you're a parent and you're wondering, these are good things to kind of either write down or journal or document. And then once you notice it's like happening more frequently, or you can predict it happening, or you find yourself avoiding bringing them somewhere or doing something, that's when I would say, I think it's time to go to the pediatrician. And the best thing to say is to ask, can you refer me either for an occupational therapy evaluation or to a developmental pediatrician who will kind of triage to the appropriate specialist. And you know, I always tell parents to say something like, I want to rule out other things. Like if my child is typical and these are normal things, I feel more comfortable ruling out other diagnoses or something that's going on. So that usually will ring a little bit better with the pediatricians.
You mentioned something that was interesting to me, where your daughter is telling you, you know, turn that off, or let's you know, especially at around 3 or 4 years old, where they're able to communicate a bit more with us. I guess taking the time to teach our children too, if we're noticing those sensitivities, when to tell us. Like if they're aware and they understand they have sensitivities, maybe it can help a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
that took a long time to get there for us. She's been pretty verbal for a while, but it took a lot of constantly like sports casting. So narrating what's happening, when before she would do that, I would say, oh, it must be, I was like, maybe the sounds are too loud, or I wonder if it's too bright. And then I'll just turn it down. Oh, you look much more calm. Your body stopped moving faster. Or I will model it myself when we're in the car, and I'll say, I'm turning down the volume. My body's feeling uncomfortable. It is too loud for me. And I just constantly overshare my feelings to the point that she picks up on it. And so I have noticed that in the past maybe 2 to 3 months, she's been much better at expressing her discomfort with certain sounds and with talking too. She'll say, your voice is too loud. Can you lower your voice? So we had to talk about that, because it used to be like, stop talking. Like, and so I would say, oh, it's too loud for your voice. Or I noticed this too. Like we would go every time we go to the beach. She loves the beach. She's tactile sensitive, but so the sand and the water, she will play. But on the ride home, it's like we're on eggshells on this meltdown. And so I had the radio on even on really low, and she was like, I don't want music. Like she was already like over, it was too much for her. So
that's so interesting.
But we worked a lot on that.
Okay. It's nice to see though. And I love how any professional in child development will always bring up narrating, whether it's language development, whether it's an OT, whether it's psychology and behavior. Narrating is what helps with everything. I love that. Because they start, I guess we're giving them a glimpse of what's going on inside our brain and our world, and that helps them understand how to think, you know, whether it's a meltdown or, you know, to understand their own world. And, you know, it's all new to them, right? So it's really interesting that you said that.
And that's a big thing that I do too with meltdowns, is I realize that, you know, we have to co-regulate for them. We have to be there. But if we can't, if I'm auditory overstimulated and it's been going on when I had meltdowns with her, it was 90 minutes long. When they're that long, I'm losing my ability to regulate myself, right? So I will do that narrating, but model it. And so there's two. So I will say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm going to take some deep breaths, and I will take deep breaths, because that's modeling for her, but it's regulating myself and it's reminding me. So I will I'm going to squeeze my hands together, but I talk all day long and just assume, and she picks it up, and you'll be surprised. Your kids will pick it up, whether or not they have the words yet. If they're verbal, nonverbal, they are picking it up. So keep doing it.
Good point. Yeah, I love that. So we have 2 other questions here. KM says, how about sensitivity with food texture? My baby said that she has tactile issues.
Yeah, so food texture. Food texture is one of those things that I mentioned earlier. It could be like a touch sense of being aversive to that texture from a sensory standpoint, but it could also be a motor challenge. So that's something that I would have screened in person, because, for example, if they have a hard time moving their tongue side to side or really having a mature chewing pattern, they will naturally gravitate towards one kind of texture and avoid something else, because it's just too hard for them to chew and manipulate. So they will prefer only one kind of texture. So it's really hard. You'll have to work with the therapist on giving them a specific list of what your kid will eat, and then they'll notice if it's related to like a chewing thing or something else.
Got it. Yeah, it's more complicated with that.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
And then there's Larry's question. Oh yeah, Larry just says, I think interprevention does not begin early enough. Yeah, as a preschool teacher, it's frustrating.
I really, really, really 100% agree with this. That's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
spending all my time trying to get in front of parents to give them kind of this knowledge and empower them to bring it up to their pediatrician. I get so many messages on Instagram where parents are like, I brought this up to my pediatrician because of what I've seen on your page. But some pediatricians are saying OTs don't do sensory, or OTs only work on fine motor or life skills and things that are
Wow.
not true. And what's frustrating is that we're not quite a self-referral service yet unless you go to a private pay clinic. The pediatricians really are the gatekeeper to OT. They have to give you that referral for your insurance to cover it. And so they're not asking the right questions, I feel like, the pediatricians to bring this out in those sessions. So they really rely on the parents to bring these up and to really drive home the point that it is impacting them and that it's outside of what's typical. Like if you have that gut reaction, especially if you have other kids and you're like, my eldest was not like this, or you have something to compare it to, or you even just have that gut feeling, bring it up and be really strong about that.
Maybe it's a good time to also bring up your Facebook group, and then we'll answer Natasha's question, and that'll be it for tonight. So, because I think this might be a good place for some of these parents to join you, to understand more, I think.
Absolutely. So I have a free Facebook group for parents. So if anything I'm mentioning now resonated with you, or you already have a child with sensory sensitivities, I have a Facebook group called Parents of Sensory Sensitive Children. Can I drop links into the chat?
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will drop the link in there. So I have that Facebook group. And then if you still want more of a kind of a like checklist or list of things to notice if your child is having these sensory sensitivities, I have a checklist as well that you can kind of guide your thought process and what to look for. And then it has some tips for supporting. Oh, you have that.
I'll put in the link while you continue describing your core. Oh wait, did you finish?
Perfect. I just put it into the chat. I don't know if that's the right spot for it, but that's the Facebook group.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so you can also find my blog and website. It is theotbutterfly.com, and I have some blogs there on sensory processing, but I post a lot of graphics and quick little bite-sized information on sensory processing on my Instagram, which is at theotbutterfly.
Perfect. So I added the link to your website, and the that freebie you spoke of, is that on your main page? Wait.
Can I drop a file in or no? Because I have it on my computer.
I think you have to do that beforehand. But you know what? I can add the link or the file on the page that'll have the link to the replay, so that all the parents can access it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. I'll send that to you. So that checklist really helps parents kind of guide their thought process when they're kind of trying to differentiate between sensory preferences and sensory challenges.
Thank you for, I really think we need to talk about this a lot more and to provide these resources for parents, because, even when I speak with some friends, we're like, oh yeah, my sons or my daughter, they are, very sensitive to certain things, whether it's textures in food or sounds. And we don't really put a name to it, or we just know that they block their ears when a baby is screaming or the vacuum is on, but there's just not enough for us to know exactly what to do with that. Or where to go, So thank you for that. And
you're welcome.
Natasha will answer Natasha's question too. So I don't know if you could see it right from yours.
Yes. Yeah. Can sensory sensitivity to food textures lead to speech delay? I have an 18-month-old who does not say many words, still only says repetitive sounds. So I'm not positive on if it can lead to speech delay, but they can certainly be correlated because of that oral motor piece that I was talking about. So sometimes I will have a client who has a hard time with manipulating their tongue to chew and move the pieces of food. So, and so that can definitely be related to speech and making sounds and things like that. So that's something that I would, if you haven't already, Natasha, bring up to your pediatrician to ask for a screening.
Interesting. Good to know. Yeah. And I guess for all these parents too that are watching, like you said, you mentioned the gut, go with your gut feeling. If something is off and you're experiencing these really big and intense tantrum, like meltdowns during the day, and you feel that something is off, speak to your doctor about it. And like you said, be the advocate too for your child, because your doctor might just say, wait it out, but what's going on in your house.
And I would even say, I have waited it out, or I waited this long to bring it up to you. I already waited, and like,
It's long enough.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time to chat with us and joining
You're
us on a
so
family
welcome.
meeting.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to be here. It was really fun.
Thank you. Yes. So for all of you who are here, what I'm going to do is take this video, and I think I might just create a blog post so that the video is up for everybody, because I think this is a lot of information that everybody needs to know. So instead of hiding it under a link somewhere that's like password protected, I think I'll put it
Yeah,
up for everybody to see. So thank
that's
you.
awesome. Yes, thank
Thank
you for
you.
having me.
We'll talk soon.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.